For a while, many travelers quietly stopped talking about Hong Kong the way they once did because the city that used to dominate travel conversations across Asia suddenly felt emotionally distant from the global tourism spotlight. But something unusual has started happening again recently. Travelers who once crossed Hong Kong off their future plans are slowly beginning to return, and many people visiting now are surprised by how different the atmosphere feels compared to what they expected before arriving. Some return out of curiosity. Some return because flights became easier again. And some return simply because they realized they missed something about the city they could not fully replace anywhere else in Asia. Because despite everything Hong Kong has gone through during recent years, the city still carries an energy that feels difficult to duplicate once you experience it properly in person. The skyline still feels overwhelming at night. The streets still move with that uniquely compressed intensity where old neighborhood shops, luxury towers, crowded food stalls, and glowing financial districts somehow exist beside each other simultaneously. And underneath all the headlines, policy discussions, and global attention surrounding the city over recent years, many travelers are rediscovering something surprisingly simple. Hong Kong still feels unmistakably alive. That emotional rediscovery matters because Hong Kong's tourism decline was never caused by a single issue alone. The city experienced overlapping pressure from political unrest, pandemic isolation, strict travel restrictions, economic uncertainty, changing regional competition, and shifting international perceptions all arriving within a relatively short period of time. For years, many travelers simply chose easier destinations elsewhere across Asia. Places like Tokyo, Bangkok, Singapore, and Seoul gradually absorbed tourism attention that Hong Kong once dominated much more heavily. Around this point, many returning travelers begin noticing something psychologically interesting happening inside the city itself. Hong Kong no longer feels obsessed with trying to prove itself constantly the way some ultra-competitive global cities often do. Instead, parts of the city now feel calmer, more reflective, and strangely more emotionally approachable than many visitors expected beforehand. That shift surprises people because Hong Kong was once viewed almost entirely through the lens of speed, finance, density, and relentless intensity. Those elements still exist, but many travelers now describe the city as feeling slightly more balanced emotionally compared to its pre-pandemic years. Neighborhoods that once felt overwhelmed by non-stop tourism now feel easier to explore at a slower pace. Visitors spending time in places like Mung Kok, Central, or Tsim Sha Tsui often notice a different rhythm emerging beneath the city's famous energy. The crowds remain intense in many areas, but the atmosphere no longer feels quite as compressed constantly throughout the day. For some travelers, that change actually improved the overall experience dramatically. Food also remains one of the strongest reasons people continue returning to Hong Kong despite growing regional competition across Asia. The city still delivers one of the most diverse urban food environments anywhere in the world. Traditional Cantonese restaurants operate beside modern cafes, hidden noodle shops, rooftop cocktail bars, luxury tasting menus, crowded cha con tang diners, and tiny late-night food stalls all within surprisingly short walking distances. Many returning travelers describe rediscovering Hong Kong through food before anything else. Because unlike some cities where tourism experiences gradually become overly curated, Hong Kong still often feels intensely local underneath its global image. You can still walk through older neighborhoods and find restaurants, bakeries, tea shops, wet markets, and side streets operating with routines that feel deeply connected to the city's daily rhythm rather than tourism performance alone. That authenticity matters emotionally for many travelers returning now. Especially because modern travel increasingly feels homogenized across many global cities. Hong Kong still feels distinct. The city also continues benefiting from one of the world's most efficient transportation systems. Returning visitors often rediscover how quickly movement across the city becomes second nature once they settle into the rhythm of the MTR system, ferries, escalators, walkways, and tightly connected neighborhoods. This infrastructure creates a travel experience that feels unusually frictionless despite the city's density. You can move from towering financial districts to mountain hiking trails, quiet temples, waterfront promenades, crowded food markets, and outlying islands within surprisingly short periods of time. That contrast remains one of Hong Kong's greatest strengths. Very few places combine intense urban energy with immediate access to nature as effectively as Hong Kong still does today. Many travelers returning now also seem drawn toward the emotional familiarity of the city. For visitors who traveled heavily throughout Asia during the 2000s and 2010s, Hong Kong often represents a deeply nostalgic destination connected to earlier eras of international travel. Returning becomes partially emotional rather than purely practical. People revisit old restaurants, ferry routes, shopping streets, harbor views, hiking paths, and neighborhoods connected to personal memories built years earlier. And because the city changed significantly during recent years, returning travelers often experience a strange emotional mixture of familiarity and rediscovery simultaneously. Some things feel exactly the same. Other things feel subtly transformed. That emotional contrast becomes part of the experience itself. At the same time, Hong Kong is still not a cheap destination compared to many neighboring parts of Asia. Accommodation prices can still surprise travelers significantly. Space remains limited, hotel rooms often feel compact, and certain tourism-heavy areas continue carrying premium pricing across restaurants, shopping, and entertainment. But interestingly, many travelers returning now seem more willing to accept higher costs if the experience itself feels emotionally rewarding enough overall. And Hong Kong increasingly benefits from travelers seeking experiences that feel emotionally memorable rather than simply affordable. The city's cultural landscape also continues evolving quietly beneath the surface. Places like West Kowloon Cultural District reflect efforts to reposition parts of Hong Kong around arts, performance, design, museums, and broader cultural identity beyond finance and shopping alone. This gives returning visitors additional layers to explore beyond the city's older tourism image. At the same time, many travelers are rediscovering how visually cinematic Hong Kong still feels compared to almost anywhere else in the world. Dense apartment towers rising against mountains, glowing harbor skylines, layered streets filled with neon reflections, ferries crossing the water at night, crowded markets beside luxury towers, and steep hillside neighborhoods still create a visual atmosphere that remains instantly recognizable globally. And unlike some cities that feel heavily redesigned for tourism consumption, Hong Kong still feels like a real functioning city first and a travel destination second. That realism gives the city emotional texture many travelers increasingly value now. Especially during an era where many global destinations are beginning to feel polished into near identical versions of each other. Hong Kong still feels imperfect, layered, intense, emotional, and visually alive in ways that continue pulling certain travelers back despite everything the city has experienced over recent years. And once people spend enough time there again, many begin realizing the real reason travelers are returning to Hong Kong is not because the city returned to what it used to be. It is because underneath all the changes, Hong Kong still offers something many modern destinations struggle to recreate convincingly anymore. A feeling that the city still has its own identity.